We'll start with the American Indians. By way of overview, folk, I want to say this. I grew up reading books about the Indians. I mean, I'm an American. We grew up watching the Indians on movies, and we get out at recess and play cowboys and Indians back when schools allowed you to bring toy guns to school. And we'd bring our toy guns and play cowboys and Indians. And we would sometimes pretend that we were the Indians, sometimes we pretended we were the cowboys. But anyway, the impression we got was Indians were a tribe of people, not as civilized as the Europeans, and there was a lot of truth in that. Now, I want to start off by saying what I really think the American Indians' problem was. It was not a lack of intelligence. Their problem was communism. You may know that the word communism comes from the word commune. Basically, they lived in communes. The word commune means villages. Village. They lived in communes, and in their communes they had no money, no social classes, no private ownership of property. It was true, outright true communism, and it led them down a road towards what I have to call uncivilization. It destroyed them. Their ancestors, no, they were not a new Stone Age people rising. They were at one time advanced people who were declining. Go farther back in time, just like you do with all the other ancient peoples, and you'll find them building mounds. In Ohio, there's a 10-mile long rattlesnake that we didn't recognize as a rattlesnake until we got in an airplane and looked down. Hey, this is a perfect example. It takes a lot of geometry to build that, folk, unless they were operating from the air looking down. There are Indian mounds here in Georgia. The nearest one's the New Echota Mounds, built by a more advanced people than what Columbus found when he came over. But they lived in communes, so they were a pure example of communism. They believed their way of life was going to produce a utopia here on earth. What it produced was a bunch of barbaric tribesmen, semi-civilized, who could not stand up to the European onslaught when the Europeans came over. Now, where'd they come from? I have spent a lot of time researching this. The original Indians, according to the standard view, crossed the Bering Strait. If any of you know anything about the world map, you have Siberia extending out here, and you have Alaska extending out here. And at one time during the last ice age, there was a land bridge across here, an ice bridge, and the Indians crossed from Asia down to Alaska. Every Indian who we've ever talked to who told us the story where they come from, none of them ever said they came from, well, yeah, this map will show it. They came across the Bering Straits. They always came to the New World across the sea. It is now known that you can cross even the Pacific Ocean in a rowboat. There is a way it can be done. Now you can't get very many fish in mid-ocean. I mean, people who fish along the shore, get out in the deep waters and hardly ever catch a fish. Nevertheless, you can carry dried food and carry a little bit of water, and you can cross even the big Pacific Ocean in a rowboat. They probably crossed the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans in relatively recent times. And they actually did not start out primitive, they started out advanced. Now, I've got to hurry. The Olmec are known to have apparently come from Africa. Their face masks have very African features about them, and also they show animals like tigers that are not found in Central America. We know that they had social classes, they had religion, they had writing. Their writing has not been deciphered. They had a lot of trade. In other words, they were civilized people. They built temples, and yes, folk, the ancient peoples seem to have a real love for building pyramids. And though what I'm about to say is really far out, yeah, very far out. Just yesterday, NASA announced that they found a pyramid-like structure on the mini-planet Ceres. We find some on Mars also. Be that as it may, pyramids are found all over the globe, on every continent: North America, South America, Africa, Europe, Asia. all over the place. And in a lot of cases, we can't tell how they were built or who built them. The Olmecs seem to have disappeared suddenly, but they had a lot of African characteristics about them. Next we talk about is the Maya. The Maya made a lot of news here in recent years because the Mayan calendar ended on December 21st, 2012. Now, when I first started teaching here in the year 2000, nobody knew that. But as time went on, I would ask the classes, and everybody, by the year 2010, everybody in the class knew that because there was a movement made about it. The Mayan calendar ends on December 21st, 2012. Well, the Mayans themselves said, what would we do if we were still making a calendar? Just like you do on December 31st, you start a new calendar. I mean, what's the big deal? They simply, if they had still been making old calendar, they had made a new one. Now, the Mayans left an extensive amount of writing, and because they did, we have been able to decipher it. Now, originally, when the Europeans first found it, a Spanish priest learned how to read Maya, and he was convinced that the Mayan script was the work of the devil, and the Spanish then destroyed all the Mayan works they could find. But 4 of their 9 books survived. And they show a lot of occult mysticism, a whole lot of human sacrifice, a whole lot of stuff that the Spanish, of course, obviously disagreed with. However, interestingly enough, they had a creation story that was very similar to the creation story, and a story of the fall, very similar to the creation story in Genesis, with the story of a woman being responsible for the fall of man. And the date, the date of the Garden of Eden story was very close to the date that we find in the Bible, about 4004 BC. I personally was at Copan one time. The Copan is built around a pyramid, and near Copan is palaces, temples, and ball courts. About the ball courts, I must say the losers of the ball game were sacrificed. In fact, it didn't give you an incentive to win. It was basically they took like a rubber ball. The game was similar to what we might call soccer, but it was basically they were taking a sort of ball and trying to get it across the goal line, and whichever team outscored the other one. And there were almost no rules. Just get that ball across any way you can, whether you kick, bite, shove, jab, or whatever. The losers were sacrifice. Human sacrifice was a big part of Mayan culture. The Mayans seem to have declined suddenly, and not due to the white man. Just like the Olmec, they seem to decline before the white man came in. What caused them? Some say they over-cultivated the land, others say drought. Modern environmentalists just love to think that they over-cultivated the land, that they went too far into the rainforest. Volcano might have erupted. The fact is, it might have been all these things. But when the Spanish arrived, the Mayans were divided into small principalities, no longer with any metropolitan centers. Their large cities had been abandoned. I have my own personal note here about abandoned. A lot of old cities have been abandoned, and all that's left of them is ruins that would be almost impossible to restore. Again, they didn't realize they were making these things of stone. They thought they were making them permanent. There's no such thing as a permanent structure. You might have noticed we build modern day buildings to where they can be easily disassembled and a new building put in its place, because we know this building we're in today will not last forever, but they'll take it down one day and put up a new one in its place, and it'll last maybe 50 or 60 years. They'll take it down. But stone buildings, the stones crack and crumble, and then it becomes a pain to fix them. The Aztecs. These were the ones that the Europeans met. We don't know where they came from, except they probably came from around New Mexico and survived by making treaties with their more powerful neighbors, but somehow they became the most powerful. Reminds me of the story of Genghis Khan. And then they conquered their neighbors, and they had an empire that included almost all of what is today Mexico. These were the people who came into unfriendly contact with Cortez. Now, I want to elaborate on that a little bit. All these Indian peoples we know, the Mayans, the Olmecs, the Zapotecs, the Aztecs, appear to have practiced human sacrifice. I have asked every class I've taught this question. If you had been with Cortez's group, and you had heard a bunch of hideous screams coming from the Aztec temple, I mean, Cortez heard them, and you were told, oh, these are the people being offered up to the sun god, Quetzalcoatl, what would you have done about it? Essentially, folk, I'll tell you what Cortez did. He went to war, put a stop to it. He destroyed the Aztec civilization, dethroned Montezuma. Montezuma's leader of the Aztecs. Dethroned him. Was it right? It might not be politically correct, but then again, to me, political correctness does not have an answer to this kind of question. Now, the point I'm trying to make, folks, is we had a big discussion about this one time, and one student came up to me after and said the best discussion he ever had in any class he'd ever been in was the Europeans' right in coming in and taking over the American Indians' land. You can make up your mind for yourself, but my take on it personally is that the American Indians conducted themselves in such a way as to either provoke or invite the Europeans to take over. And a lot of the blame for the problem actually has to go to the American Indians. Now, if that offends you, I can't help it. I mean, I have to say my piece. You're welcome to say yes.
Are the Shawnee not going to be discussed? Are we not discussing them?
What's that? Well, you can discuss it if you want to.
Oh no, is it? I don't know if it's. Is it not something that we're going to be talking about at all? For the brief covering that we have.
With the brief time we have, hardly. I do want to mention it, but I have very strong feelings about this because, I mean, my wife's ancestors were massacred by Billy Bowlegs and the Seminoles as they moved to Florida, and only 4 of the boys survived, and one of them is one of my wife's ancestors. But and the Indians would come in and steal the European children because they said, hey, you've been taking, oh, you've killed our children, we have the right to take yours. And in some cases, folk, I mean, the war that the Indians fought was morally justified for 2 reasons. Number 1, the land was theirs to begin with, and number 2, you're just a white man. The white man was not keeping his treaties. Nevertheless, the other side of it was the war was suicide. The Indians were hopelessly outnumbered, especially since American Indian women would only have about 1 or 2 babies per woman. The average Indian lived only 18 years, and it's in North America. In other words, they had a huge population decline, very huge. And European women, when they came over, they were averaging 8, 10, and 12 babies per woman, and more Europeans just kept coming. Then Europeans had their horses and their guns. Now, eventually, the Indians got horses, the Indians got guns. They became excellent horsemen, became excellent shots with a rifle, but they were hopelessly outnumbered. So the fighting they did was, the wars between European and India was to last some 200 years. The Incas, they lived in what is today Peru. The Spanish found them in the middle of a civil war, and that made them easier to conquer. All right. Your book simply, rather than call these people by some other more uncomplimentary names, they call them stateless. Stateless means these were people who lived in a tribe. The tribe might consist of 200 or 300 persons. And they had no money, no private property, no social classes, no royalty, no nobility, and no writing. So we have to term them uncivilized. They would live in a certain area for a while, and then when they completely exhausted the resources of that area, they'd simply pack up under what few belongings they had, and they moved to another area. And they'd settle there for a while. They simply could not form a society any bigger than a tribe. All right. Before I move on, I mean, I went through this pretty fast. Does anybody have any comments about the Indians? I mean, there's a little bit more I want to say, particularly about the Latin American Indians. In Latin America, there is the Nazca lines. The Nazca lines are miles and miles and miles of very, very straight lines. Now, folk, without a certain type of geometry, it's impossible to construct a straight line that's miles and miles long. In the Army, they'll tell you, well, I already knew about that. If you walk, you're going to walk with taking one step after another, and eventually you're going to wind up turned around and wind up back where you were to start with. How do you get a straight line miles long? And even your book, this may sound strange, but if you read your book, they even say that there are some people who believe that the Nazca lines were directed from a vantage point in space. Of people looking down who had radio contact with the people on Earth who told them where to draw the line. And weirdly enough also, if you actually, I mean, you can't tell that the lines are there except from an airplane. That's just like that 10-mile-long rattlesnake that we found in Ohio. But when you're flying over the officers, but on the ground, you have to actually look at just the color of the ground is just barely different from the color of the part that's not lined. So it's very difficult to tell the line from the non-line on the ground, but up in the air you can see long, long, straight lines. In addition, there is a city of Costco that's some 13,000 feet. Well, what's great about that? Simply this. It's right on the edge of the coast, where the coastline starts out as a fairly deep water, ocean water, and all of a sudden rises a cliff straight up 13,000 feet. At the top of the 13,000 foot mountain, folks, that's taller than anything ever in Georgia. At the top is a bunch of stone structures where no two stones are alike, and yet they interlock together perfectly. The stones were quarried from the ground, sea level, not sea level, and transported up 13,000 feet. How did they do it? We do not know. Could we do it today with our technology and machinery? I have heard it, we can't. You can't go from sea level to 13,000 feet without taking time to stop and get yourself used to the thinner air. Anyone who jumps from sea level to 13,000 feet in a few minutes is going to suffocate. Your body has to acclimate to that height. And yet they got these rocks from the ocean level, down below, up 13,000 feet, interlocked them perfectly. Again, indicating that these people had some type of advanced structure building that we simply don't know about. All right, now, the other group I want to mention, I don't have in my notes, are the Arawak. The Arawak Indians, that should be capitalized. These were the Indians that we found living in the region of the Gulf of Mexico. There are no Arawak today. They became extinct. However, DNA test shows that some 60% of people living around the Gulf of Mexico, 60% of Indians, have Arawak DNA in their DNA system. But none of them, the Arawak, became extinct, largely as a result of the Spanish coming in and wiping them out. I want to say this about this. I mean, Columbus has been called a mass murderer, but now I want to say this in his defense if I can. He had an 11-year-old boy at the helm with one of his ships, his big ship, and that 11-year-old boy dashed to Santa Maria to pieces. So he couldn't take every one of his crew back home, so he left part of his crew in a certain place and said, "I'll come back, we'll go and get you." So he went. He came back with 17 ships this time. They went to the place where the crew had left. They found all the Europeans had been slaughtered. This was the first bad blood between European and Indian, and it led to 400 years of conflict that wound up with the Indian being crushed. Who drew the first blood? Maybe the Europeans did. Columbus, after all, his crew consisted of jailbirds whom the Queen had let out, promising freedom if they went. I mean, they were not the best of humanity. Again, we don't know what the details were. We never did ask the Indian. Instead, we just simply slaughtered them. It might be the Indians provoked the massacre, and then the Indians massacred, not realizing that the Europeans were going to come with horses, cannon, heavy armor, heavy equipment, rifles that the Indians didn't have, and slaughter them all. Anyway, all right, I think I pretty well covered what I wanted to about the Indians. I wanted to give some time. But hopefully what you got from this is the ancestors of all the Indians we met were once very highly advanced, and they were in a state of decline by the time the European arrived. What caused the decline? Personally, I think was communism. Something else I want to say about the Arawak, and this was true of almost all the Indian tribes, except for maybe the Aztec. Their women tended to be equal. They did not subjugate their women. I mean, this is in the book. Your book always devotes in almost every chapter what role did the women play in society, and in most cases, the women were subjugated. I'm hesitant, folk, to say this, but I feel like I have to. Your authors do not even realize, I don't think, that they're saying it. Maybe they have no idea that they are, but what I can't help but notice is that in every case where that they made the women nearly equal, or they made the women equal, the result was the civilization went to way, way, way down. Having said that, I'll quit. I mean, folks, the authors, I mean, just look at all what the authors say about the women throughout your book, and even in volume 2, and I can't help but wonder. I mean, I had a female say, "Why is that?" I said, "I'm not going to answer. I do have my theories, my opinions." But anyway, the Arawak Indians, like most North American Indians, the women were nearly equal. Communism, again, I challenge any one of you to show me where that has resulted in a betterment of society where it's been tried. Communism starved some 20 million Russians in the 1930s and some 25 million Chinese in the 1950s. And folks, this is standard history. It starves its people to death just simply because the central government cannot manage a country the size of China or the size of Russia. Now maybe we could do it better with today's computers. Keep in mind in the 1930s, Stalin had no computers. In the 1950s, Mao Zedong had no computers either, but nevertheless, communism results in what we see among the American Indians. All right, now, anybody want to have any comments? Yeah, Venus.
Growing up in Jamaica, we were taught our history.
Yes.
Was that our Indians, when Columbus came over, I think they tried to work them, but they didn't work out. But then it was the English that came after the Spanish, defeated the Spanish and put the Indians to work. They couldn't deal with the load of the work, so they died out. That's in Jamaica. I think.
Yeah, okay, I'll tell you something. I've been to Jamaica 2 times. My brother taught school there for 3.5 years in a little town called Trinityville in St. Thomas. Okay. A brother of mine taught school, Jim Cunningham. You might even heard of him, but maybe not. Maybe so. Anyway, yeah, I went there 2 times, and I heard this. I mean, I was very fascinated by it. That's where I first trained in the word Arawak. And yeah, the Spanish maybe did not try to enslave them because they found that the Africans made better slaves than the Indians. Also, the American Indians had no immunity to smallpox. Africans did. People who work around cattle have some resistance to smallpox. The American Indians had no, all right, I was going to say, the American Indians had no pigs, no chickens, no cows, no donkeys, no horses, no oats, no rye, no barley. What did they have? They had corn, they had turkeys, they had deer, they had buffalo. As far as beast of burden, the only beast of burden the American Indians had though was a llama. And that was only found in Latin America. Otherwise, the American Indians did not even have the wheel. They just apparently felt like they didn't need one, but they didn't even have the wheel. But they were missing a lot of stuff that the Europeans brought over. Anyway, the English did try to enslave the Indians, with the result that a lot of them just simply died out. Not so much that the English outright killed them, it was disease. Particularly, well, 2 diseases, smallpox and typhus, typhoid fever. Again, most of you have never seen a case of typhoid fever. In 1926, my grandma Cunningham died of typhoid fever at the age of 28. A few days before her 28th birthday, actually. That's how recently it's been. Today, we're all immune to it, thanks to vaccinations. But the American Indians had no resistance to these diseases. All right.